Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of New Vita Let's Talk. Today we have Dylan McLauchlan with us today. He's a real estate investor, a leader in the community, a coach, a wholesaler, and a serial entrepreneur. So thanks, Dylan, for coming on and joining us today.
Cool. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah. So for those, I guess, who don't really know you, do you want to give us a brief background of like who you are, where you come from, and what is it that you do?
Yeah, for sure. So I was born and raised here in London, Ontario, and I'm currently 30 years old. And always had a little bit of that entrepreneurial spark. So not to an extreme degree. Obviously, there's tons of people that are, just constant serial entrepreneurs. But
The Gary V's of the world.
Exactly, right? But always kind of looking at like the paths that are set out for us with a bit of a critical eye, right? Trying to figure out like what's the angle to get where you want to go. Trying to play the game with the end in mind. And so so it's allowed me to try a lot of different ththings, maybe go a little bit off the beaten path where other people have kind of gone forward, and I've been able to get some good results on that. So, when I was younger, played around with a lot of different, entrepreneurial ventures, like I said, doing like online marketing, building websites, things like that, while I was kind of building up the job in the background. Ended up going into the construction field as an electrician and got my license and worked through that for a while. And then ended up stumbling my way into real estate investing and then really built that out a lot and found a lot of success with there. And found the success there as well as finding such a great community and networking with people in that space. And so, I've been investing in real estate, investing, wholesaling, doing renovations for almost a decade now. So that would be, the big bread and butter of my professional career thus far. And but always looking to learn, develop, and grow. So
It's crazy how you've been able to accomplish so much and you're only 30 years old now, you know what I mean? So like, I guess one thing I want to ask is, who's Dylan in high school? Like if you were to describe yourself in high school or like young, like who are you?
Yeah, so it was interesting. I guess in high school, I love that question, by the way. I love like one way to look at it is like, if you're a character in a movie, which character would you be? So I don't, it's hard to say. I think in high school, I was definitely like, I was the type of guy where I was kind of friends with everybody. Like I definitely had my clique, if you will, or the guys I liked to hang out with. And, they're very social guys that like to, think differently, just kind of go to different events, parties, keep busy, do activities. I was on the football team, did a bunch of sports, was like in the gym a whole lot, but then also was very academic as well. So I felt like I've always tried to wear many hats. I don't like to be pigeonholed too much. There's certain identities I love to take on, but just...
What high school you go to?
South.
Oh, South. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Out of all the sports you played, what was your favorite?
So my favorite, actually, we were talking about this earlier. I always have had a big draw towards extreme sports and adrenaline type sports.
Yeah.
That as well as just kind of physical training in general. And anything, I just love that sense of progression you get when you're training. So whether it be, running a marathon or doing, swimming races, getting your time down or lifting more weight, I've always really enjoyed that. But at the same time, some of the free kind of flow and the play that you get with types of extreme sports, right? So like, when I was really young in public school, I was like the big skater kid. Like I love skateboarding. I got super into that. And then from skateboarding, I think my next big obsession in that was gymnastics. It was a sport called tricking at the time, which was kind of blowing up when I was that age. I feel like it's kind of petered out now in terms of the popular lexicon. So tricking is a mix between gymnastics, martial arts, and breakdancing.
Okay.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so I was really into that, although I wasn't...
Any good?
I wasn't a phenom. No, I'm very big. I'm like 6'2", right now I'm like almost 220. So and I was even pretty big back then, which is not the ideal build for gymnastics. But I loved it. I got to a decent level. But then, had a lot of fun with that. And then, from that, just, tacking on other fun sports and things like that. So right now I'd say I do mostly golf, boxing, as well as just general working out and training.
Cool.
Sweet.
I want to say, I guess, at what age was it when you realized, okay, I don't want to do the typical, 9 to 5. Things work a little different. Like, was that super young? Like, was that when you were like 16, 17?
Yeah,
or
definitely.
Or earlier?
Yeah, so I would say the first seed that got planted for that, I've done a lot of introspection on this, and I think one of the big things that really tipped me off to that was actually watching my father, kind of, and watching his path. And, because I think we all try to learn from our parents, and I think that's a good way to develop. So I'm not going to say anything bad about them. My parents did amazing. So my father was an electrician as well, very hard working, still to this day. He's got one of the craziest work ethics I've ever seen, right? But he was always working super hard and working hard on his job, and he was working to make money, right? So it's that constant time for money exchange. And that was great. He had a great life and everything worked out well, but that exchange is a losing exchange. And I think at a really young age, I had a sense of that. Like, you know, are you working to earn a living, or should you be working to try to design a life, right? Which approach is more efficient? And so I always had that feeling. And then it really wasn't until actually my first kind of, I guess, adult job. So I worked jobs when I was younger, but midway through my college degree, I ended up getting a co-op at like a transformer maintenance company. And that was when I read The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. And I would say that was the big, I'd read, you know, Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I'd read things like that before. So I kind of like had that thought, but 4-Hour Workweek was really the first time where I read a book and I was like, wow, you can have your cake and eat it too. So I remember that really blew up my mind. I was like, okay, there's something to this.
Do you want to explain a little more on what you mean by that? Like have your cake and eat it too?
Definitely. So to have your cake and eat it too, because the 4-Hour Workweek, and that title has kind of, you know, that title's not necessarily what the book's truly about. You learn that as you kind of go through and think about it more. But I think on an initial read of that book, you're reading about this guy, Tim Ferriss, who ended up, you know, working the corporate route, making tons and tons of money, you know, even starting a business and making tons of money with that, quote unquote, living the dream. But he realized he wasn't truly happy with that. And so it wasn't until he deconstructed things, made things more efficient, and was able to remove himself from that, like, you know, work to make money kind of mentality and automate things a little bit more, that he was able to get his freedom back and live this incredible life. And I also really enjoyed how in that book, you know, Tim, there's many crazy stories about Tim where he was able to kind of hack the system in a way to achieve amazing results. And there's many entertaining stories in the book about that. Like he ends up winning a karate tournament, I believe, just because he found a rule where if he can push somebody out of the ring. And so because of his wrestling background, he just used his weight cutting ability to be super heavy and just like push these little guys out of the ring. And then
That's funny.
He won this like this Japanese title, right? And so just little things like that I found like that really like lit a spark. And then that book was very seminal. And then afterwards, because then I kind of went down that rabbit hole. And then the next really big book was The Millionaire Fast Lane by MJ DeMarco. And so it talks more about, that is more practical book on building businesses and that whole wealth equation.
And what age are you when you're reading these books, roughly?
So I was 17. When I was reading this book.
17, eh?
13
Those are some
years
big books to be
13
reading.
years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's funny these days because like back then nobody was reading them, but nowadays all that information's disseminated on like TikTok, Instagram, like so it's crazy. Like you're seeing that uptake at a really early age now, which is really cool.
And then I guess what was the reason why you went into real estate?
So the real estate one. So at that time I'd been like experimenting with some different muse businesses, as Tim Ferriss calls it in his book. And I tried some website design, some online marketing, things like that. And I was making some money out of it. I flipped a couple websites, but I didn't quite get that traction because really in business it's tough because you don't get to that inflection point until you have a business you can sell. Until then, you're really still working for money mostly. And so I was, you know, banging my head against the wall, putting some effort into that. And I was really young and I didn't have any startup capital. So, you know, and I wasn't making huge moves. So, you know, I was having some success, but I was like, man, this is weak because I'm putting all this time building this business. I'm like, and putting a lot of work into it. And at the same time, I was working construction and I would go on like an 80-hour call, make like double time, overtime, and just make crazy bank for like, this would be, you know, coming into 18, 19 sort of thing. So I was like, this is tough. I'm going to kind of shelve this at the side. But I ended up having, so actually, and this is kind of how I got hooked onto investing because I think that's really big too. So around that time, I think it was around 2008, I had a little bit of money saved up because I was always pretty frugal and I'd always worked jobs. And I ended up, you know, I made a couple $1,000s and I'd put that with an investment advisor. And this was right after the 2008 market crash. And so I remember I was like working, and then if you invested after 2008, like no matter what you did, you were making crazy money.
Yeah.
So I remember I'd see these statements from my guy and I was like, holy cow, look at the returns on this. Like, this is crazy. Like, if you calculate the percentage, I was like, man, what if instead of a couple thousand, you know, this was hundreds of thousands, it's gonna be millions. Like, this is it.
Yeah.
And so I kind of had that investment spark always. And then it wasn't until, so then that was the thing, like, you know, doing the whole real estate thing, a lot of people talk about it. It makes a lot of sense. So at the time, I remember I wanted to move out. And I was like, well, instead of renting, I'll house hack. And I ended up doing a student rental house hack near Fanshawe College. And, you know, I was very pessimistic at the time. It was a big move, right? You're investing tons of money, especially at a young age.
And at that time, like, were you seeking out, like, coaching or mentorship or, like, anything like that? Or were you kind of just diving in on your own? Or?
So at that time, I was immersing myself in knowledge. I remember I was working, there was this job, this construction job I was on, and we'd all meet up and drive to the job site, like an hour or something like that. And I literally went to the library and got, like, 12 books. Like, I had this book bag, every real estate book I can every real estate book. And actually, shout out to Mark Lawfer, because he was like one of my favorite books I had was his book, and it's cool. He's like he's a guy in the community now, and I know him, great guy. And so I remember like reading all these books, and I was like getting all fired up. And then like Bigger Pockets at the time, that's one was a bit newer, and I liked early Bigger Pockets. Now I haven't been listening to it as much. There's still some really good episodes, but so I was immersed in the knowledge on my first one, and so just constantly studying up. And so not to jump around too much, but then it wasn't until my second one that I really started networking and building up the network, and that was the next piece. But yeah, the first one, I did have one friend, shout out to Paul Plumstead, my buddy, a London investor as well, man that wears many hats, and he was one of my good buddies, and he had investment property as well. So, we'd always go back and forth. He has a construction background as well. So, whether or not you get that mentoring piece from a coach, from a mentor, or from peers around you, right? That's the real key of it, is those people around you. Now it gets harder to do that at higher levels, or sometimes, it's much more efficient to like, pay the money and get that personal relationship. But that's how I kind of hacked it at the starting stage.
And from a young age, like, did you realize like how important it was to hang out with the right people, or did you have to realize that the tough way?
Yeah, so I've always kind of had that in mind,
Yeah.
but I'm maybe not the best at always practicing it. But I think the saving grace was that I always put the activity kind of first and foremost. I remember I had a girlfriend once, and she's like, you always seem to make like the most random friends. Like, how do you like know these people? And it's because like I got into gymnastics, and you just start hanging around at the gymnastic place and talking with the homies there, and just being social, and sharing your common enjoyment of activity, and boom, next thing you know, you got some friends. You get into real estate investing, start hanging out in rooms with other real estate investors, be passionate, be a cool person, give value, everything like that, and next thing you know, you got real estate friends, right? And so I think that was it. If you really identify, because there's like there's who, there's what, and then there's how. And so really any of those elements, if you build it up high enough, I think it'll trickle over to the other elements.
Yeah. Cool.
I want to ask, what did you find was the hardest, like, doing it so young? Did you find like people were more willing to share information with you, or do you think people kind of took that away, like, oh, maybe he's too young to be learning about this?
Yeah, so I think when I started out, I kind of had the construction background to lean on a little bit, so that definitely helped a bit. I didn't have too much push. Maybe on my first one I did, because the first one kind of thing like, I really don't know what I'm doing. And, I had some professionals that kind of like steered me in the wrong way, or, you are maybe listening. I was listening to maybe some of the wrong people a little bit. Luckily, there wasn't any wipeouts or mistakes that were too big. But I didn't feel like it was too bad. I don't feel like I was discriminated too much based on age, but I feel like you can definitely overcome that just by knowing your stuff, just by, being confident. So.
And do you have any like I guess like big slip ups you had like during your, I guess, growth to where you're at now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wouldn't say any that were too big, because I'm pretty grateful. Any goals I was trying to make, I ended up getting close to or moved in the general direction. So there wasn't anything too big that like set me back. I felt like it was a pretty smooth thing. If anything, I felt like I could have been more risk on.
Okay.
But at the same time, I was enjoying the process, enjoying the journey, and everyone has to go at their own pace, right? So.
Yeah. What was the strategy you were using when you first started? And then like when was it when you realized, okay, maybe in your pivot strategies, or like this is actually like a business that's ready to grow, like I need to take this more serious, or was that from the get-go?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess because right now, really the big popular thing in the vernacular is the BRRRR, like, BRRRR investing, you got BRRRR property, right? And so when I started, I knew some of those concepts. I didn't have a formal, strategy or structure to BRRRRing. I remember even like my very early on after my first property, I was like, well, if I can just do a couple of these kind of things, just like really quick kind of, napkin math on how I wanted to scale up. So it wasn't a specific strategy that I like dogmatically held. I feel like it was a lot of, just, okay, each deal makes sense. These deals in general make sense. This is a money-making thing that I can do, that I can keep doing and keep multiplying out. But that being said, and that is one of the things, like I definitely didn't build it, especially at that young age, to a big business. I wasn't one of those guys that, went up and tried to hit, tens of millions of dollars very quickly. So it could have been done maybe, but at the same time, I think that's what allowed like less slip ups, because each step I was very confident in, it made sense, the numbers just worked. So
yeah. And like at that time, like did you think that you would be able to acquire as much properties as you have? Like, was this a goal? Like, let's say you were 10 years out, or like, you know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah, actually it's really funny. It was a little bit after getting my first property, after a couple months of operation, I was like, hey, these numbers are working. I'm making some cash flow and I'm living for free. Like, this is awesome. And so I literally remember I was driving back from work one day and I was listening to Tony Robbins, and I was just getting all pumped up, in that right state. And I remember like literally having that eureka moment. I'm like, man, if I do 4 of these, if I maybe do 6 of these, and I think that was kind of where my head was at the time. The first really big financial kind of barrier I wanted to hit, my personal 4-minute mile was kind of like $4,000 a month. Because the way I looked at it, I'm like, if I can make $1,000 a month cash flow for my portfolio, like that kind of replaces my job, right? I feel like that's a healthy income. It's almost $50,000 a year. That's the average median income in our area kind of thing. That was the big one that I really wanted to hit. But then I ended up hitting that pretty quick. And then also I was at that point, I started really starting to surround myself with all these motivated entrepreneurs. The real estate community in Ontario is incredible. So fortunate we have so many awesome people. You see other people that come from other entrepreneurial ventures and they're like, wow, everyone in the real estate space is awesome. Like friendly, willing to share, willing to help. So
and like, sorry, just to touch on that, like even a couple years ago, I would think like, oh, I wish I was part of that community, right? And then looking back now, it's like I've been trying to immerse myself in that community for the last year, and everyone's so nice, so friendly. They're willing to share their experiences and like help you grow. So like we're so lucky and fortunate to have what we have in Ontario in regards to real estate, like investors, right?
Completely agree. So I think, and that's one of the funny things, because then you kind of get to that level and then you're like, oh, well, like there's other people at this level, I can move up. I know I've got more in me, or like, you get hungry for that next thing. So
yeah. So when you hit that like $4,000 a month in cash flow, like what was that like? You know what I mean? Because like you hit your goal so young, and then you still have a whole life to live. You know what I mean? Like, did you feel like, I know you said in an earlier podcast you felt like you were the man on the moon. You already hit your goals so early. Like, what do you do now?
Yeah, a little bit. So yeah, it's interesting because there's definitely people do sometimes have in their wealth journey those big milestones, right? And I think like the biggest dopamine hit you get is when you reach that financial freedom. And for most people, that's when they retire at the end of their life, right? 60, 65, whatever it is, they pull the golden parachute, they start drawing their RSPs and they retire. And it's like this big thing. A lot of times they have like a party. It's funny because my parents and my aunts and uncles and stuff like that are getting to that age. So it's funny like watching them from afar kind of thing. It's like, oh, well, some people do it differently.
Yeah.
But so that is a huge high. And that is it's kind of an exciting moment, but it's weird on the entrepreneurial side because your net worth and your cash flows, there is a bit of a lag to it. So it's almost like you already have momentum past the finish line, and you look back, you're like, oh, I already crossed the finish line. Like, this is crazy, right? And so there's a little bit like that. That is one of the interesting things I've noticed about real estate is that, there's really no set time to celebrate because, okay, you find a deal, you're negotiating. This is going to be a good deal. The seller, he's verbally firm with you. You're excited. You're like, yes, but you still haven't closed it yet. That thing still could slip away, right? They could ghost. Then you get the contract signed, everything's signed, ready to go. You're like, awesome. But it's like, well, this thing still hasn't closed yet.
Yeah.
It might not close. Issues come up. Then it's like you close the property. And it's like, awesome, I closed. Like, this is awesome. Then you're like, okay, now I have this whole project in front of me. This could be months. This could be a big thing, tens of thousands of dollars, renovations, whatever you're doing with that thing. And so then that becomes a process. And so then it's not really until after everything's done, everything's renovated, refinanced, rented out, and you're sitting back there and you're kind of like, oh, okay, like, cool. Like, I actually have a funny story about that because it was around that same time I'd hit that mark financially. I had just completed a ton of projects, right? So bang, 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 a bunch of things had been off. And then I even had a brief amount of time off work because I'm an electrician, so it's a lot of contract work. So, we're really busy sometimes, off work sometimes. So at this time I was, the house that I bought to House Hack, I was fully renting it out, and I had, moved back home very briefly because I would typically just vagabond between my properties, live there while I was renovating sort of thing. And so I'm at a point in my life where, I've got a great construction job. I'm living at home. My cash flow is like thousands of dollars a month. Everything's going great. And I'm kind of just sitting there. I'm like, well, I'm unemployed, sitting at home. Like that. Like I remember I was at the grocery store and some guy's like, oh, hey son, like, do you go to Western? Like, it's around September. Yeah. I'm like, nope, I'm unemployed and I live at home. And he's like, oh, like, yeah. So it's kind of fun, that stuff. Yeah. But then that's where you just find the fire. You find another thing that gets you. Those periods of boredom, allow you to find that next thing to get excited about. So
yeah, cool. And
I was gonna say, is that your thought process about like being retired then? Is like being at home with nothing to do and you have everything being paid for?
Yeah, like what's your definition of being retired?
That is a good question. Yeah. So and it's tough, right? Because like, how do we define terms? Like, I think you get really busy at certain times and life, it gets crazy and you're just like, oh man, you're like, it would be just sweet if all these problems can be done and I could just chill, something like that. You know, and some people scratch that itch with maybe travel, or like they set like a finish line to cross to allow themselves to do that. But anytime I've had like down periods like that in my life, it's very quick that I load it back up. I find other goals to focus on, new things to do. Otherwise, like things get existential really quick. Like you start asking, and this is one of my favorite parts, actually, going back to the 4-hour work week, is the last chapter actually really talks about that a lot. Like when you have that, you know, tabula rasa in front of you, that blank space just facing you, it forces you to be really introspective and ask a lot of those deep questions. And I think that can cause a lot of people a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. A lot of people distract them away from those questions, right? But yeah, what I've learned is really like you can't project too much in the future. You have to take one step at a time. And so, you know, I find that's why that whole retirement, the term retire, right? It's not to just be retired and done. It's typically to retire from something, right? So like, hey, we had an old car model. Well, we've retired that model. Now we're producing a new model, right? And so you usually retire into something else, I find.
Sure.
Yeah. So basically, when you said you retire at 27, you kind of like put off that 9 to 5, and now you're like working still and like still, but on your own sort of businesses, your own things.
Yeah, actually, I would say that was the biggest inflection point. I think there's still times where trading time for money does make a lot of sense. You know, there's always going to be a bit of that because your wealth is basically cash flow and net worth. Those are kind of the two. Sometimes net worth will go up, but you need that cash flow too. You know what I mean? Otherwise, you could be stressful. Unless you're a crazy entrepreneur type and you just don't care about money coming in. You're like, we'll find it, we'll borrow it, whatever. But that can be stressful, especially.
Is there a sweet spot where you balance your cash flow and your net worth? Like, is there some, like, should it be balanced or?
I think, well, that's a very good question. I think it does make sense that you like, if you find some guy with a $10 million net worth, chances are he's got at least like 250K coming in a year, right? Because even just off a small percentage point of that, right, he should be making that income. So yeah, like 10% per year of $10 million is $1 million right there. So yeah, it does start to level out a little bit more, but I guess it could be, and I can speak a lot on the real estate side of things because real estate is a bit more of a cash flow heavy type business. But it does, things do get skewed a lot when you talk to like tech startups and things like that are like these long-term plays where people have equity locked up for a very long period of time. So yeah, it's interesting. There is definitely a balance, and it depends on the person, right? Some people invest all their money in dividends. They like seeing that monthly cash flow coming in. Other people will be more equity play, right? So it's a comfort thing, I guess.
During your growth process, like, how were you financing these projects? Like, did you have to raise money at all? Did you have to like talk to people? And how did you like break that comfort? Like that was probably uncomfortable. How did you break that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I actually didn't do a lot of money raising, especially getting started. And I've been in the game for a while. And this is kind of going back to what I said, is that I could have probably taken on more risk. I could have leaned in a little bit more, but I'd always been saving up money and I've always kind of been working different jobs. So, and even with construction, right, I did like a 2-year degree at Fanshawe, an accelerated electrical engineering technology. And with tax write-offs, the tuition ends up being very low. So because of that, I even had a co-op in between. I was making like $25 an hour. So I was always banking a lot of money. I had enough for my first down payment on my first property. So I did a 20% down on that one. That went well. House hacking, cash flowing basically day one. So everything was good there. Then the second property, I did a 5% down. And that one, once again, like maxed out student rental. And that one I did all the renovations myself. So, turned over a whole property for like $35K. Yeah. So very little money out of pocket. And that one was cash flowing too. And then at the same time, I'm working, I'd do these calls where I'm working like 80 hours a week. So I had lots of money coming there. So once I had that snowball going, that was enough to bankroll my third property with 20% down. And then I also did a JV at that time as well for number 4. And so then at that point, that was kind of when I was.
So it's like a consistent grind. It's just you're just grinding, like to make that money. That hard work.
It was a pretty it was a hard grind for like the first couple of years for sure to get that snowball rolling. And then because of that, I didn't need a huge amount of investment capital to kind of get that ball rolling. And then this is the interesting thing too. And anyone who's like a real estate aficionado, I think these are some of the interesting thoughts going on right now, is because back a decade ago, price appreciation was pretty flat. So the BRRRR strategy wasn't this like crazy sexy thing that everyone's talking about nowadays. Yeah. Because if you look at the past 3 years, it's like, bought a property, bang, put down flooring, bang, pulled out 100K, like what up? My second property was a bank sale. It was super rough. Like there's so many things wrong with it. Actually, my parents went to go see it. My dad had a home inspecting business back in the day, so he even took a look at it. He's like, "Yo, don't buy this." He's like, "This is gonna be like massive renos, like $100,000." And I was like, "I disagree. I'm gonna do it all myself. Like, we'll be cheap, like frugality. Let's go."
Yeah.
And so even after buying it super cheap, I wasn't even the offer that was accepted. There was another offer that fell through of financing because student rentals are hard to finance.
Yeah.
So I was even a weaker offer. So I got a great deal on it. I did all the renovations myself. And even then at the BRRRR, I had and I did do 5% down, but I was maybe able to pull like $20,000 on that one.
Yeah.
And
So
that's with you doing most of the work too,
that
right?
was doing like everything, right? Just because like you weren't seeing those lift on appreciation and like things weren't like popping off and exploding, and even rents were like pretty flat. Like the delta between kind of your average rent and something that's a little bit nicer wasn't crazy.
Yeah.
Like now, this past year has really skewed it because you are seeing some landlords that are like getting these insane rents.
Yeah.
And like a 20% or 10% increase on rent, if you instead of looking at the cash flow, how that 10 or 20% applies to the rent, if you port that to the other side of the equation and apply that to the cap rate, right? Because the cap rate's how you evaluate the equity of a building. The value that's bringing is crazy, right? It's mind blowing almost. And that's literally just somebody taking advantage of this market opportunity to get these super high rents.
Yeah, no, the rental market has been interesting because, like, obviously, like, during COVID, everyone was, like, worried, people aren't paying rent or, like, like, what's going to happen? And then we saw, like, rents drastically increase, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then, I don't know if it's just me, but I'm finding, like, it's kind of, like, going down a little bit more or tailing off, or it could come down even more, like, in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what would you say on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't have a crystal ball on it. I do think that it is logical that the rent will kind of follow the real estate prices a bit.
Yeah.
And they seem to be trending downwards a little bit. So I do think you're going to see more softening. It's softened a little bit, right? Trends are kind of coming down in most markets. But it'll just be interesting to see. Like, that's the thing. It's so hard these days because even if anything, the past couple of years have taught us is that it's so hard to predict out, right? And that's why I really do like, when you're sticking to the fundamentals, it's like, when you're sticking to the fundamentals, there's so many ways you're making profit that, you can't lose. And I think a lot of people lost sight of that over the past couple of years.
So at first you were like burning and focusing on like student rentals. Like did you change your strategy any like after that or?
Yeah, so I guess that would be a strategy. I definitely stuck to at the beginning, a bit more of the student rentals because the cash flow is really there. Once again, I was mentioning the difference between renting a bedroom versus having a multifamily and having a bachelor or a one-bedroom apartment. There was, a bedroom seemed actually very attractive. And then the rents kind of started to skew where apartments were actually getting a lot more than the bedrooms, and the bedrooms kind of lagged behind. Especially in London, we had like a year or 2 years before COVID, we had a college strike at Fanshawe. So I think that depressed things a little bit, just different economic factors like that. So, and now it seems like, because last September, the student rentals shot back up again. So it's, it's one of those things that it fluctuates a lot. But I guess the big reason was I went over more into multifamily after, just because the scale, when you're buying 4plexes, 6plexes, they are a lot bigger. There's a lot more scale. And also they are a bit easier too.
Yeah.
The student rentals, I did have, like my last student rental was this duplex with like 11 bedrooms in it. And it was just like, to manage that thing was crazy as wild. So like.
And you were, did you have property management at that time or were you managing the property yourself?
So I was managing it for a bit, and then we ended up, so that one I owned with a partner, and we ended up experimenting with some property managers, let's just say.
Yeah.
And they were okay, but there were some issues with them. So things were okay. Things were kind of cash flow, and it was like decent enough. But there was a lot of over-the-shoulder management. There was a lot of like, anytime a problem came up, they couldn't really fix it. So, I would have to be called in to fix it or figure things out. So that was an experiment with property managers. Now I do have a really good property management team in place for the rest of my portfolio, and things are working out great.
Cool.
But yeah, that first one like taught me a little bit, because especially some of these property managers that were doing the student strategy, right? They would just like throw people in bedrooms, max it out. A lot of international students potentially, which that's great. You get a great rent. You can, jack the rates up, but it's going to cause a lot of damage. It's going to cause a lot of issues. You really don't know what's going on. So yeah.
And you did a lot of wholesaling too, right?
Yeah.
How did you get into that?
So the wholesaling one, I kind of stumbled into that one a little bit. So really early on, I was trying to find my own deals. That was the main motivator. And so I was putting out a lot of marketing. I was kind of doing all the classic deal search strategies. And I ended up, so the first step was I kind of started working with an investor that a really big house flipper here in Ontario. And I was working with him a little bit, and he was kind of my main, like if I found a good deal, I'd usually actually just bird dog it to him, which, for those not familiar, bird dogging would be like the first step before wholesaling, where you don't get the property under contract and sell the contract. You just kind of sell the lead. You know what I mean? Ricardo, I got this cool deal. you know, it's teed up, it's kind of good to go. Hey, step in, see if you make something happen, and like I'm your boy, so just toss me a couple G's if it works out.
Yeah.
Simple. Cool. And so I was doing that, and I was closing some of my own deals, and then I ended up, and I think that was when what happened with the wholesale. There's another another really good friend in this area, and I was looking at this deal, and it was the most chopped up property. It was super illegal. It was like, this guy was like, yo, it's a 7-plex. You end up going there, it's just like 7 bedrooms, and you put like hot plates, and there'd be like a toilet in the bedroom, and it was like in a kind of rough area, and it was just such a nightmare. And I was looking at it, and I had a bunch of projects on the go at the time, and I'm like, there's value here. Like the cost is so good, but I was like, this is going to be such a nightmare. So I'm like, I don't think I can take this on. And so I ended up, so then I had it under contract. It was all good to go, because that was the thing. Another buddy was like, hey, if you don't want it, like I'm super interested. I'll come with you. I'm going to check it out. We'll do all that. Yeah. And so then he was like, man, I'll buy that contract off you. And he was a big enough guy. Shout out Matt McKeever, no stranger to anyone in the real estate space in Ontario. Yeah, just great guy, always super honest, right? And so we were both looking at it, and he's like, yeah, I'll buy the contract off you. And I was like, cool, whatever's fair. And he's like, well, it's like wholesaling, like $10,000 is fair. And I'm like, sweet. And so we did that. And he's such a good buddy, so I don't mind passing value in the network like that. Like, the relationship between us, we've made each other hundreds of thousands between different ventures, and not to brag, but just like that's the power of networking.
For sure.
And but that was the thing. So then he's like, man, this is awesome. He's like, we gotta go way harder on this, because like you're finding some good deals. And so I was like, yeah, man, that makes sense. So we just started hitting it
How
hard.
are you finding these deals?
So basically all the classic methods, right? Banded signs, flyers, online ads, door knocking, and just really a big obsession about looking for deals. I think that's the whole thing. I know Grant Cardone has a big saying, like, who's got my money? Like all that stuff. And it's almost like being obsessed with like, where am I getting this deal? How am I getting this deal? It's interesting. So I have a student right now who has a bit of a online marketing background. And online marketing, it's all about like funnels, right? Like click funnels, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And so it's been funny, because he was talking about, okay, like I need to get this deal funnel set up. I need to set up a funnel. And super smart guy. He's killing it. But I was telling him, like, man, the way I look at deals, it's less like a funnel, and it's more like this big lake or pond, and you just have different fishing rods. And it's like, you get a fishing rod, you put it in there, you make sure it's secure, you make sure it's working, then cool, then you set up another one. Then you set up another one. Because real estate is a weird one, because the volume can be very low, but the impact you're getting from each deal is like huge. Like you can make $10, $20, $100,000. I've heard $100,000 wholesales, which is like
That's
nuts.
crazy. Yeah.
Right? And so like you can literally burn, it's kind of scary, because you can burn so much money, but then when you get that pop, like it's all good. So even like I had made a website, and I got one deal off the website.
Wow. And
the website, pretty cheap, pretty easy to set up. And then that one wholesale, $20,000. So it paid for like 2 years of this website, more so. So, it just thrown a lot at the wall, I feel like.
Yeah. So once you got that bug, then you started taking it like more serious, started wholesaling a lot more.
Yeah. So then I really leaned into it for quite a while. There's almost a 2-year period where I was wholesaling very aggressively. Yeah. And then I ended up buying a lot of deals myself. I got some great deals, and I got so loaded up. And that was my whole thing. My whole purpose was always the cash flow. Cash flow is kind of primary, and then building the equity was cool. And that was kind of the back end. But then I had three 4-plexes and a 6-plex that were like rough, super rough. So they required a lot of renovation. And that was one of the skills I lacked at the time, more the outsourcing, getting other people, because with the construction, that's kind of the trap you fall into. You're like, oh, I can do it all myself. Yeah. So I was kind of feeling very limited, and, work demands were on me a little bit. So, and I think I had a partnership or two at the time that were, being kind of active. Yeah. So I ended up kind of taking some time off of that a little bit to focus on stabilizing the portfolio. But then still had some bird dogs running around for me. But, yeah.
Nice. And are you still focusing on equity and cash flow now, or how have you changed your strategy because of the conditions we're in now?
Yeah, so I think the one constant that I've always focused on is that investing piece, right? So, either your return on equity or the return on time, or like the return on the asset you're going to get. So both make sense, right? If it's a deal where you're going to make a lot of equity, maybe you want to flip that or figure out a way to sell that to capture that equity back very quickly. once you're at a certain point where you have enough cash flow, maybe you could hold it a bit if the cash flow is not looking super great, because you're just like, the lift on this property. That's typically when if you buy a really beat up property or you negotiate a really good deal, and then, you can just sit on it because you've all that equity built in. And then on the flip side, cash flow is always great. I think for me, probably I get really excited about cash flow because I think that's the easy one. If you're just like, hey, this can make me $1,000 a month, like that's really exciting.
Yeah.
So, but I think the investment piece is the biggest thing to think about, right? Because it's either there's like a real estate entrepreneur where you're making active income, or it's like investing, right? And you got to treat it like an investment. You got to look at, the value of your money and if it's making a good return. And so I think that's a big thing to consider as well.
Mm-hmm. And when did you start private lending? Because that's another big thing that I think a lot of people sleep on. Like a lot of people are in a situation where they have a lot of money either tied in their house or in a saving account that's making a little bit per month off interest, and like they don't realize that money is not working for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
What are different ways that you've made your extra money work for you that's not like in a saving account?
Yeah, definitely. So actually, I've done quite a bit of private lending, and so with the private lending, it really came about. I ended up actually lending out a small amount very early to an experienced investor. And so I dipped my toe into it very early with just like a small amount, but it kind of helped me get comfortable.
That's smart though, with an experienced investor.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That one was a bit of a leap of faith. That's maybe not something I'd recommend somebody doing right away because, you always have to be careful. And, private lending is amazing for so many reasons, but there is a real risk that something could happen, right? Especially in this climate. So you do have to make sure you're vetting and make sure things are done properly. But that's one of the things. And this is one of the things I tell people, because the private lending I do, I maybe wouldn't recommend to the layman, because like I invest with people that I'm very good friends with. I know how they fit into the social circle, how they fit into the ecosystem, all the people they know. Mm-hmm. So there's a bit of the social credibility there. Then I know them so well that I know their entire portfolio. I know all their deals. Yeah. And these are deals that I would do myself. Like I'm excited about them. It's actually interesting. This past like 6 months, I have probably had like 4 or 5 people reach out to me to borrow some money. Yeah. And I've heard some like sketchy stuff. And I'm like, oh, I got to renovate my cottage and I'll be able to pull money out. Or, oh, I'm doing this like this new build in this town. And like once it's done in a year, maybe we'll flip it and we'll get this amount. And it's like, no. Like that's not, I don't know that business. And there's a lot that can go wrong with that. So like, no.
So even if it's close friends, like they still got to present the deal to you, right? As a private lender.
Yeah, it's still got to be a really good deal. There was a young guy that reached out to me once and was kind of pitching me, and he had a lot of good sales skills. And I remember I told him, I was like, because at the time all my money was tied up, so it's already going to be a no, but we were just talking about it. And he's a friend, and that was like the big thing I told him. I'm like, man, like the number one thing with the private lending with the investors, when you're dealing with investors who have a lot of money, it's like, how am I guaranteed to get this money back? Like, how is this a sure thing? How is this super safe? And you have to know, on the other side, as an investor, you have to know, okay, he's not blowing smoke up my ass. This is actually a likely like chance of return. This deal makes a ton of sense. His portfolio is really well capitalized. Like I love his operations. Things will work out. So that's another big piece of it as well. But yeah, the private lending space is great. And it's interesting because once again, talking to other entrepreneurs in other communities, that's not really a big thing in other communities. In the real estate community, super common. Like everyone's tossing money. I've been in groups where like, I've been in groups where there's probably like 10 of us all hanging out, and it's like multiple of us have like, oh, he's got 100,000 with him, he's got a couple 100,000 over here, this person's maybe has like a couple 100,000 with these people. So
but it's amazing because everyone grows in a scenario like that where everyone trusts and knows that they're all putting money to good work, let's say, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And this is a big part of it, because I think, and in terms of even if you're trying to get your own capital, it's all about like who's the closest in your circle, right? Those concentric circles of influence. And a lot of times it's like if your family is in that can be great. But then also if you have other people that are doing the same thing, there is a bit of that bond, right? It's like other real estate investors, they know what you're doing. They'll be a bit more comfortable with it. So that can be a good source as well.
Yeah. So how important is that for you to like stay with like that close, tight knit network that you have in real estate investing?
I think it's very important. Yeah, it's helpful and it's enjoyable as well. So I think like that's the key. It shouldn't be like pulling teeth. Like unless I guess there are some people that are very introverted. You know what I mean? In which to them I'd say like, hey, just learn how to extrovert yourself. Yeah. But it should be fun. It should be enjoyable. And I think those are when the best relationships are made. And like it's even funny. Like there's a lot of investors that literally like we'll just send each other memes in the DMs and just talk shit like crazy. But then like when something's like when there's a deal, it's like, okay, well, boom, serious. Yeah, business time. We'll talk about this. We'll do it. But then like, and actually golf is kind of like golf's a big one, obviously too. Like everyone always networks over the golf course, so that's a funny one as well. But just guys you enjoy spending time with and people that you like to see what they're doing. They have good energy. So yeah,
cool. And like throughout this whole journey, like I'm sure there might have been times where you felt burnt out or like you're putting way too much out. Can you take us through like what you do to bring yourself back into it? Because I'm sure a lot of our audience, like how you manage so much things at once.
Yeah, just copious amounts of caffeine, modafinil, nicotine gum, the list goes on. No, that's a good question. It's tough. That is one of the tough things, dealing with the burnout and being able to like prioritize what you're working on, things like that. Like I said, everyone has their own pace. Everyone has, their own comfortability doing things. But I think that's part of it, right? It's like working out. Like you kind of just got to lean in a little bit. And I was actually watching a really interesting TED Talk today about, the author was sharing the story about this guy who was driving his pickup truck he was going to go try to get some lumber, some firewood. And it was like snowy road and everything like that. And his pickup truck got stuck. And so the tires just started spinning. And so he's like, I'm stuck. He waited around for help for a little bit and no help came. And so then he decided to get out of the truck and start chopping down some wood. And he's like, well, when somebody comes, they'll come. So he loads up his truck with wood. And then all of a sudden, because of the weight of the truck with the wood, it was able to get traction and he was able to drive out successfully. And so I think that's a lot to it, right? When you commit to doing certain things, you'll find a bit more of the energy to get it done, right? Like there's a lot of talk in the community about being motivated by pleasure, but I think the motivation of failure, it can be a super powerful motivator too. Yeah. So I think, just committing, it's like, hey, here's the goal. Here's what I want to do. You'll see that door open and you'll be like, well, I have to take it. Like, here's the opportunity, and some doors will close, but as long as you're kind of stepping up to the plate, you're stepping up to the tee, you'll see more doors open. And then once you do step forward, you're like, hey, I got to do it now. And then you're kind of committed. It's
like you kind of have to sacrifice like now for the future, or else you're sacrificing your future for like now, being comfortable now. It's like one of those things.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that commitment of the future is like that really like holds you to it. Cause you're kind of stuck at that point. And, you're kind of stuck at that point. So I feel like that's a helpful one, because it's like do or die, by hook or by crook, you have to make it happen. So,
So I guess to dive a little deeper there, what keeps you so driven? What would your why be?
Yeah, that's a good question. That is a very good question. I've been thinking a lot about that, like motivation, drive, hunger.
I feel like it's something that evolves too, right? It's not just like static, it's dynamic, your why, as you grow, right? Or
Exactly. And it's tough, because I think I really like the model that you have multiple whys, right? Like there's like the big ambitious, like I want to reach my potential and actualization and things like that. Then there's even like the medium kind of whys, that kind of keep you going a little bit. And then there's even like petty whys. Sometimes, like I remember there's one time I was like late at night, I was doing a reno and, it was 1 or 2 in the morning and I'm just like, I have work that has to get done. And I remember I was just like, it was so toxic, but I remember being like, I was like working, I'm like, I'll show them. Like, I'll show them all. And I'm like,
Batman,
and I was just like, they'll see. Yeah, right? And then like, sometimes I'll be doing a reno, and actually there's one funny like voice I'll have in my head where I'm like, I'll just be like, yo, your boy is sick. Like, just in my head, I'll be like, yo, sick. Like, killing it. Like, boom, another thing done. Like, check.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the motivation comes from different points. I really like the model by, I think it's Martin Seligman that talks about in the book Flourishing. And he talks about to flourish, you really need, it's like you have this long-term vision, something way out in your future. And that's kind of like your purpose, your potential. That's like the long-term goal. Then you need like medium milestones you hit along the way. So let's say you're trying to become a doctor, right? You envision yourself as a doctor. Then you have milestones along the way, right? You go to get into med school, you do residency,
Yeah.
And then you have your kind of, day-to-day, week-to-week, little achievements, things you have to get done to move yourself along the way. I think once you set up those three, and if you can derive some pleasure from what you're doing, then I think it becomes a lot easier and, life's just more enjoyable and you kind of have that motivation.
Yeah.
I've noticed you're really well versed with like books. Like it seems like every book you've read, you have something retained from it. What would you say is like a book that you still go back and read a lot now?
That's an interesting one. I would say like one of my favorite books of all time is Relentless by Timothy Grover. Okay. I think about that one quite a bit. I like anything by Tony Robbins. I actually just finished his Big Date with Destiny event, which was awesome with the Infinite Results Real Estate Coaching Group. That was really powerful, actually, the big 4-day one. It's tough. I feel like now, so when I was really young, I started reading. Like I got really addicted to reading and like audiobooks, like 2 times speed, just crushing them. And then when I was doing renos, like I would just constantly have audiobooks. When I'm in the gym, audiobooks all the time. And I feel like I kind of read most of the, popular self-help books, or at least have like an idea of them. So nowadays I feel like it's more, like little snidbits, like book summaries, things like that, stuff to like refresh. So right now, some ones also too that I've been really big into because the whole motivation and hunger piece. I think there's a lot of interesting science about dopamine, things like the winner effect, mindset by Carol Dweck, like having that growth mindset. I think things like that are very important to really rewire your mind and be on success. And they're things that apply to any domain, any level of achievement. So. Yeah.
Cool. I guess who would be your role model, or like it could be famous, but someone that you look up to and you're like, okay, fuck, he's getting up, he's getting it. I gotta go get up and get it too.
That's Andrew Tate. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. Demonetized, right?
Yeah, top G.
Yeah, top G. No, it's hilarious. I think Tony Robbins is like an alien. Like he's just like from another planet. So that guy's like crazy. Even like going to his seminar, like seeing it was like, you know, he'll go from like 10 a.m. to like 2 in the morning, and he's just like, and it's everyone that I was with was like falling asleep. It's like 2 a.m. Everyone in the audience is like falling asleep. And Tony's been going this whole day, and then he literally just starts like, cause he's writing stuff down. He could probably tell he's a master, right? He tells that like the audience is losing, so he just starts punching his like easel. He just beats the shit out of it, like all pissed off, and he's like, okay, back to it. And like everyone's like, whoa, what just happened? Woke up. So he is like a master. I think he's an alien. He's like a once in a generation. So yeah, he's awesome. You know, there's a Andrew Huberman recently. I've been loving me and all the boys.
Amazing. Have you been following any of his steps? Like, cause like, sorry to cut you off, but you said like you do all this like health and fitness stuff. Do you follow any of the stuff he says to do?
Yeah, so I really like the sunlight. That has been a big component. I've wanted to get more into the cold exposure and things like that. I've been very interested. So there's this guy, Gary Brecka, who partnered with Grant Cardone to do 10X Health Systems. Basically, Gary Brecka had a health company and Grant Cardone bought it. Recently became famous because Dana White lost like 40 pounds. And like Dana White was tested by this guy and he was going to die in like 10 years, his biological age. And so he went on this health system. He completely turned things around, lost like 40 pounds super quickly.
Wow. So
I recently went down the rabbit hole of some of his stuff. I find it very fascinating, the effects of oxygenation, being able to utilize oxygen more effectively, breathe more effectively. So I've been kind of looking at that a little bit more. But yeah, I really like Andrew Huberman's stuff on mindset, because I think mindset stuff gets so clouded all the time. Like people are just like, be positive, or like believe it, achieve it, you know? And, but with Huberman, it's like science backed. It's based on tons of research. There's always different angles that you would have had to read like thousands of research papers where he has some other expert. So, but I feel like the walking, the sunlight, the movement, and then some of his protocols for stacking things or the way he supplements things are very interesting.
Yeah. Do you think that like being healthy physically and mentally, that does align with being like successful in business? Like,
massively. Yeah. The number one thing, right? So like you talked about motivation.
Yeah.
Motivation, most people would define motivation as energy, right? Because like I feel motivated. That's like a feeling. That's like energy you have, right? And so, you know, motivation can also be the why, a reason, like motivation, a motive for action. But like if you have that energy, that's huge, right? Like, so if you're feeling sick, you know, it doesn't matter. You're not gonna be able to do much. If you're like a lethargic, you know, person, it's tough. And that's why it's kind of a trade-off sometimes. Sometimes if you're killing it in the gym, burning yourself out, you probably don't have that that physiological energy to put towards something like, you know, success financially. You know, sometimes if you're being social all the time, you're going out partying, you know, you won't have that energy. So, you know, energy management's huge, almost more important than time management in many ways.
Yeah, and I'm sure you probably see that across like your network as well. Like it's pretty consistent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh yeah. Because like the killers, they're just like constantly on, like ferocious. Like it's just like it's intense. And you see it in the eyes too, right? Huberman talks about that a bit. Like it's like the dopamine. Crazy. Yeah, because they have that like focus. So I love it.
The one thing I found even too, what I like about him is like you can kind of understand like even too, he's like he comes back from like always working out, always this, right? And he kind of was able to link up like the lifestyle of like your mind also works a lot better when you're like physically active all the time, because also too it's like you're firing like there's like as you said like the dopamine, but there's also like I forget what he was saying, but there's something that your brain like releases that like it motivates you to constantly keep pushing for something.
Yes,
I don't remember exactly what it is, and I'm my bad for slipping up on it, but
that's exactly the dopamine. You nailed that. One other fascinating thing that he talks about is because I find that's very interesting, is that, so there's all this mindset stuff that people talk about, and mindset would be like coming at things from the top, where it's like, you know, you fix the way you think about things. But then the other ways you can come at the bottom and fix your physiology, right? Because it's like, there's a great saying that fatigue makes cowards of most men, right? When you're tired, you're like, nah, I'm going to step back. I'm going to be more on my heels. And so one thing that Huberman had that was great is that like when you're stressed out, by literally doing bilateral horizontal eye movements, just scanning the horizon almost, that relaxes you because like our bodies have a circuit that's been triggered. And so that's why walking is so effective. That's why when you go outside in like the sun setting and you have that like diffused gaze, it actually like relaxes you. Things like that are super impactful. Even like breathing, like, everyone's all like, oh, I'm trying to meditate, but it's hard. I can't do it. It's like, literally just set a breath pacer, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. And that will like drastically calm down. If you have like a heart rate tracker, if you track heart rate variability, you'll see it. There's a great TED talk. It's How to Be Brilliant Every Single Day by Dr. Alan Watkins. It's like one of my favorite TED talks. And you can like literally see where he just gets people doing paced breathing and their heart rate variability, which is like a measure of recovery. It's the balance of the different nervous systems. Like it totally regulates right away. Yeah. So it's incredible.
Like even Goggins talks about that in his book. Like when he was running like those crazy 100-mile marathons that Goggins does, he's like, I used to remind myself to just like, breathe. Just once he could breathe, he got to relax and he wasn't like so panicky and he kept on pushing, you know what I mean? But like Goggins is another person who's just like, holy shit. Like you think like every time I feel lazy, I just think about Goggins. I'll literally just get up and just like run or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's a monster.
Yeah, he's a crazy example of how far things can push.
Oh,
like,
yeah. Literally the definition of push. But yeah, I guess what would be your advice for any new real estate investor, or anyone who wants to get into the market in these sort of conditions? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is you really got to find that clarity. And I feel like that's one of the big sticking points that people have. So you really got to be clear on your goals. It's not enough to just be like, oh, I want to get into real estate investor. I want to invest. That's such a broad topic. And you can go that way. You can use that to get started out on your journey. But like listen to that spark and then start doing research, start getting into it more, start like looking at potential types of deals. And so that was kind of the way I came about it, is because I had that, like, I'd always been thinking about investing and, I loved that concept. And so, if you just look at it as an investment, it's like, well, what would you have to make for this to be a good investment? Because there are some risks, there are some headaches with real estate. You are leveraging a lot, but there's the opportunity for really oversized returns. And there's ways where you can like leverage your time, leverage your expertise to get even higher return. And then also with real estate too, there's kind of 3 levels, I feel like, of real estate investors. There's like people that just do like one deal, because almost everyone will buy a house at some point. And so I feel like it's a universal skill. So even if you spend if you're totally green and you spend a year obsessing about it, you're going to learn so much that you can take for the whole rest of your life. Oh, yeah. So that's huge. Some people, they just maybe do one deal, something like that. And then there's another group of people that maybe have like a couple properties, let's say like 3 to 5. So they've got like a nice little portfolio and they just kind of self-manage, just like chill and easy. And that's a great stage to be at too. And then there's the people that really want to scale it out, make it more of their full-time thing, really kind of go bigger with it. And then that could go to extreme amounts, right? Yeah. And so yeah, that's the thing. It's like a step-by-step process. It's finding out where you want to get to. And once you get to there, you might want to go to the next step too, right? Like the journey reveals itself. But I feel like clarity is the biggest thing. I feel like, what return do you want? What are you comfortable doing? How much money do you have? Start talking to professionals, get more and more clear, inch closer and closer to that goal. And then you'll get there eventually.
Yeah, cool. And I know you don't have a crystal ball, but like, what I guess like the market conditions now, right? Like, what do you expect? You hear all this talk about like the war, the high interest rates going up, you know what I mean? Like, what are your predictions? Or being experienced for 10 years, like, what do you see coming?
Yeah, so, and that's the thing, I want to make a general recommendation I would have, because we don't know for sure.
No one knows.
So it is very interesting. But I think right now there has been a lot of craziness, a lot of things shaken up recently. I think we're entering kind of a time of winter, a little bit like that, where things are going to be a bit more challenging. Things might be a little bit more chaotic. And so really the only thing you can rely on is going back to those fundamentals and building up your skill set and becoming a better investor. The way I always look at it too, because a lot of people do get fearful, but it's like, if you are, there's like that saying, like, if you're camping with a bunch of friends and a bear attacks, you don't have to outrun the bear. You just have to outrun your slowest friend. Yeah. So like, same with investors, same with people buying property. And there's been so much hubris over the past little bit where people are just buying whatever, terrible deals. They're not good operators, things like that. So I think there's quite a bit of insulation if you're getting in there, but you have to be coming in eyes wide open. You have to be willing to hustle, and you have to look at it as a long-term game. I think, and even back when there were some very euphoric times in the market, I think even still people realize like real estate is a long-term game. Like you're looking from 5 to 10 years really for some of these investments for them to really play out. So if you're doing the buy and hold strategy. So I think, it's coming, looking at it from a long-term game, long-term, I will say that there's so many things economically that make sense. I think North America is very well positioned geopolitically. So we have a lot of factors going with us there. Regardless of what's happening with interest rates and lending and capital, it does seem like if you look at like 100-year trend, the interest rates have been going down. So I think the value of money, the ability to to just hoard large sums of capital, make an arbitrage off that is disappearing. So, it's going to be having tangible things. It's going to be, offering value to the marketplace. I think that's always going to be there. So yeah, just looking at it as a long-term game and just doing smart deals. And once again, and that's kind of the strategy that I've always set out with, I'm one of those people, like, if getting too far over your skis, right, I would have never, it would have been too uncomfortable. I wouldn't have liked doing that. And so I think that, no one should go that crazy, but, one deal at a time, I think Tim Ferriss talks about that even like if you map out like, well, what's the worst case scenario with this deal, right? And that's typically how I'll run deals. I'll do like multiple scenarios. As long as the worst case scenario is like decent, then, might as well throw the hat in the ring on it.
Yeah.
So.
And are you still focusing just in like mostly London area, or are you outside of London now?
Yeah, so I'm mostly focusing on investing capital in the London area just because I like the area so much. I have so many systems built up here.
Cool.
I'm looking at the other areas a little bit, but I'm kind of trying to position it and see what comes. So, yeah.
Nice. Should we get into the Instagram questions?
Yeah,
there's a couple there. Yeah, no, man, This is a popular one.
Awesome. It's exciting, yeah.
No, a lot of people, especially our age, you know what I mean? Like around like 27, between like 20, I would say between like 22 to like 32, you want to either get into the market or know more about real estate. And like a lot of people ask me, and then, it starts with like getting in touch with a realtor, a mortgage broker, like simple things like that. Like a lot of people don't really realize, so it's important to have these sort of conversations there.
Have you realized it's like kind of skyrocketed the amount of people who actually want the information compared to before? Like, cause you do coach, right?
Yeah.
So like, I guess like over this like period of like, let's say 5 years, how much more coaching have you done over like, I guess from like the beginning of your experience till now?
Yeah, so I only started coaching very recently, but I can speak on that it has definitely the space has gotten much more popular. Much more people have got into it. Part of that could be, though, because even myself aging. I'm now in an older, like when I started at 20, not many 20-year-olds are investing in real estate. Yeah. And now at 30, I'm at an age where, like all my buddies who don't have properties, like, oh man, I'm thinking about buying a house, especially over the past 3 years when things just skyrocketed. So there's a lot of maybe people. There's always going to be those. I think the space is definitely, there are more people getting into it. There's a lot more like hype built up. But very quickly you realize the people that take action, the people that don't. Yeah. So yeah, I'd say there's a bit more people, but the action takers are still few and far between.
True. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of like that Bitcoin hype, that Dogecoin hype. It's like I feel like real estate kind of got that hype, and you know what? I'm a new real estate investor too, so who's to say that I didn't jump into that? But I get what you mean. Like with time will tell who's serious about it and who's not. And like me and my fiance are very serious about it, Claudia. So like we're trying to prove that. But no, it's interesting. But yeah, let's get into the Instagram questions. So first question, your first property versus your most recent property, how do they differ and what has improved?
Yeah, so my most recent actually was a flip I sold a little while ago, and it was interesting because that was a student rental in kind of a similar area that I got a really good deal on, just completely gutted it, flipped the whole thing, and so that one I was going to buy and hold. I was intending on keeping it, but then the numbers just worked out so much better as a flip. I was kind of analyzing the return once again. And so it was interesting because that brought me back to my roots a lot. My last buy and hold was a sixplex, so now I'm going more larger. But that flip I did because I was just going to pick it up. I wasn't going to do it as a rental. I learned so many mistakes. So in terms of just like disaster proofing certain areas, that one was nuts. And I think I really flexed my muscle on being able to optimize a student rental on that one because I'd gotten up to quite a few. I think I had 5 or 6 student rentals at the peak. And so I took this property. It was a 3-level side split with 3 bedrooms and 1 bath. And I turned it into a 6-bedroom, 3-bathroom property with 2 separate laundries, 2 separate kitchens, 2 separate units. Yeah. So like every inch of this property was utilized. So I think like that was the thing. My first property, was kind of cute, and it took me a while to really fully leverage that one out and get and bring it to the highest and best use. So I feel like I'm a lot better at that now. Yeah,
no, it's crazy. Even like me, like our first property out in Sarnia, you learn so much off one property. It's like, holy shit. Like you can't learn that from a podcast or from like books. It's like the experience itself, right?
Yeah. Because even that's like the who, not how we were kind of talking about earlier. It's like, because a lot of people you see that are doing renovations, they just hire out a designer. And that's great. You'll probably get a really good design. But, I know a lot of, like, I think that's a very high value task. And especially when you're trying to utilize every single inch. Yeah. Like, that property that I flipped, I probably put at least 50 hours into just like designing it and especially as the renovation process comes forward, I had a GC there that was working with me pretty well. And so like, we get partway through it and I'm like, oh, well, actually there's some space here. So we can alter this, we can change this because like I wanted to use every single inch because the amount of leverage you get on those properties, the amount of capital there, it's well worth it. So
you start to realize that like using other professionals and their skills is so much better for you in the long run, right? So like who, not how, right?
That was a big game changer for, some of the grunt work and can always, but like I think some of the design work, the creative work, if you're really good at that, you can really get some good value out of that.
Yeah.
So
Sweet. All right. The next question. What has been your secret to acquiring so many assets in a relatively short period of time? I mean, I don't know if 10 years would be like short, but like acquiring like that much assets, it's not your typical thing.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think it's just knowing the game. It's knowing how to acquire those assets. And real estate, I think, is a bit of the cheat code for acquiring assets because there's so many things you can leverage, like a lot of the financing products that are available to individuals. If you're trying to get a business loan the same way you get a mortgage on a house, it's totally different, right? So I feel like that's it. You just got to really know the game. Real estate is interesting because the valuation of those assets is pretty large. You're allowed a lot of leverage. So you can really like stack things up pretty quickly there. And it's pretty safe in terms of like, because you could leverage heavily with stocks as well. There's ways to do that, but you could get margin called and wiped out. So so that's the thing. So I think I was just really knowing the game. And then especially too, like when you're kind of able to build the asset a little bit, add the value, like it's like that too, right? Because if you're leveraging and buying stocks, but you were actually working in the companies, right? Like Peter Thiel, I love the story. He's got basically in United States, they have the Roth IRA, similar to the TSFA. Yeah. Peter Thiel used his Roth IRA to invest in one of his tech startups, and he's a multi-billionaire and he took that thing to like hundreds of millions. So he's got like $100 million tax-free account that he can invest and make like bank off of 100% tax-free, which is nuts. So like, if you can leverage businesses too, that would be crazy. But I feel like
imagine that'd be.
It's like insane, yeah. And then with the connections too, and
can you leverage insurance though?
Yeah,
like in the States you can use that for a loan.
In the States you can do it, but like Canada will never allow that.
There is a product. I do have a friend, and this is not something I'm super familiar with, but I did sat down with a buddy who is very well versed in this, and there is a product for it
here in Canada.
Yeah, on a mortgage product.
I'm not leveraging insurance on a mortgage.
Life insurance, no?
It's life insurance. Yeah, it's a life insurance product that basically you can put money into it and then you can lend or you can borrow off of it. And because it's a life insurance product, it's got like a fixed guarantee return. So it's an interesting way because it's called infinite banking because basically you're just leveraging off of money you already have. So I do have a friend and we sat down and he went totally all through it and he's a financial genius and even we were trying to pick holes in it and everything looked pretty legit. Yeah. But the thing is that it's a very rare person that can really fully utilize it. With the life insurance products, if you buy it when you're younger, you're getting a super good deal. Yeah. So the guy that was actually trying to sell my buddy on it, he's like, you're a unicorn. Like usually people under 30, like you're not in a financial position. Like I never talk with people under 30 about this product. I'm usually talking with people who are like 50. Yeah. And so for them, it's kind of beneficial at the end of their life and they have got a lot of capital to invest. Yeah. For somebody who's really young, once again, unless you have a big chunk of capital, maybe in this economy, maybe you sold out, some crypto or some real estate at a good time. Yeah. There's maybe some things to do, but I feel like you're in the millions when you're kind of considering those strategies, I feel like.
That's crazy, yeah. Cool. And then last question. What are your goals for 2023?
Goals for 2023, and this has been one of the years where I haven't had like super locked in financial goals. I just want to keep building, increase my income, increase my net worth, make sure things are going up. Yeah. I feel like I've been doing really good financially and I just want to kind of stabilize, maybe start kind of some new projects, things like that. That'd be cool. Some things for the next kind of like 5 to 10 years.
Any new project ideas or?
Nothing too fleshed out, just little things, we'll see. Then on the flip side of that, so typically I like to have financial goals, health goals, and then like relationship goals kind of thing. Relationship in terms of family, friends, everything. Yeah. And so I feel like lately I've been in the health and fitness goals a little bit because I've taken so much time off of that. So I'm just finishing up. I want to finish up a bulking phase before the winter, put on a bit more mass, play a bunch of golf. I got to a point with boxing where I'm like decent at sparring now, and so I'm able to I feel like I can comfortably train boxing and do things like that. So that was kind of a big goal before. But consistently breaking 90 in golf. I'm sure some other little things will come up. And so, I feel like this year is kind of a bit of an open slate. So it's just really, finding those things to stay passionate and driven for. Yeah.
Awesome. Sweet. Nice, man. I guess, is there anything else you would like to promote or let our audience know?
Any plugins?
Cool. If anyone is interested in coaching, you can feel free to reach out, DM me. I'll get you hooked up and we can talk, or even any little questions like that. I always like when people are asking questions, interested, passionate, ask good questions, do your research before, obviously, but always love seeing the community grow and build. So, anyone can feel free to reach me up on Instagram, Dylan McLauchlan. I'll go from there. Awesome.
We'll make sure to add all the handles and make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And for all of you who've gone this far and actually seen the whole episode, make sure you DM us and let us know what you think. Yeah. Cheers. Peace. Peace.
Peace.
Cool. Peace.